This is Nintendojo contributor Zach Fornaka, and this is Nintendojo's review of Shinobi Art of Vengeance. For generations, Sonic the Hedgehog has been synonymous with Sega's brand. But he wasn't always the top dog. Sega's first attempt at a console mascot was the elfin and chubby Alex Kidd. Alex had trouble finding a mechanical identity. In one game, he's playing rock, paper, scissors. In another, he's BMX racing. In a third, he's navigating giant houses. And in a fourth, he's just a ninja. That last one, Alex Kidd in Shinobi World, was an acknowledgement that nobody really wanted Alex Kidd games anymore, and that the torch had been passed to a new contender, Joe Musashi of the Shinobi series. Joe Musashi has himself long since passed the torch and passed out of mainstream cultural relevance, but Sega's been in a nostalgic mood as of late. Lizard Cube, the French developer who previously turned out a well-regarded sequel to a Sega classic with Streets of Rage 4, is back to hopefully continue its hot streak with Shinobi Art of Vengeance, a successor to the series' golden era on Genesis. While there were mechanical changes from one classic Shinobi game to the next, there was also a great deal of shared identity across the set, culminating in the Genesis swan song and definitive Shinobi title, Shinobi 3: Return of the Ninja Master. Ever since, when people have described other games as being like Shinobi, like Hagane, Ganryu 2, or Vengeful Guardian Moonrider, they have meant Shinobi 3 specifically. Aside from the obvious ninja aesthetics and story and character concepts, the signatures of the Shinobi series include 1. Linear stages with aggressive and obstructing enemies that make the player fight for progress, 1 foot at a time, with time pressure forcing the player to actually engage with that challenge. 2. A high commitment moveset where every option has both upsides and downsides, and the player can't just wing it or style on enemies like they're sandbags. 3. Ranged combat as the default option or at least an equal partner to melee combat. And 4. Persistent resource management with decisions and player performance in one stage affecting the player's options in the next. An obvious question to ask, then, is how Art of Vengeance follows on from Shinobi 3 mechanically. Lizard Cube has given us a game with 1. Sprawling stages with relatively few enemies outside of dedicated combat arenas, with branching paths and keys and locks that necessitate running around and backtracking. 2. A gratuitously powerful moveset that includes an oppressive dive kick that 90% of enemies have no counter to, plus a generous iframe dodge, copious aerial mobility, and a parry too for good measure. 3. Melee combat almost completely crowding out ranged combat. And 4. No meaningful resource management outside of the post-game boss rush specifically. Of course, this all makes sense from a market perspective. Neither Ganryu 2 nor Vengeful Guardian Moonrider make sense as templates for Sega and Lizard Cube to follow if what they're after is mainstream success. It is a miracle that we got one major publisher's 2D ninja game this year that managed to escape being some combination of Metroidvania, roguelite, and/or Souls-like. That the other is a Metroidvania shouldn't be too surprising. Look at the release date Blast Zone created by Silksong. Metroidvanias are what the people want, so Shinobi needed to be disassembled and reassembled into a Metroidvania, like Strider was a decade ago. While it might disappoint players who liked Shinobi, for more than its cool ninja aesthetics and brand cachet, that doesn't mean it can't be a good game. And on a first playthrough, Art of Vengeance is a very comfy ride. There's a ton of visual and mechanical variety from one stage to the next. It's all drop-dead gorgeous. Joe's moveset feels great in the hand. There are a ton of tasteful references for the aging millennials. And the Metroidvania-style stages are relatively lean by Metroidvania standards, buoyed by a map screen that does a good job of delineating secrets versus the critical path. But even on a naive, go-with-the-flow first playthrough, the pacing starts to suffer in the final set of stages, which significantly increase the branching and backtrack-happy stage designs that had previously been kept under control. Additionally, the game saves its worst traversal ability, the slow gliding, for last. And it does damage not just to the pace of the levels as a whole, but to the pace of individual screens. This negates what had been a strength of Art of Vengeance's design compared to the classic entries, which is the kinetic feeling of forward motion. The critical path through each stage is surprisingly mellow, both in terms of platforming and combat. When the platforming gets serious, it's in side sections that tend to be completely free of combat and vice versa. The serious combat sections tend to have very light platforming, if any. That's unfortunate in that the game is at its best when these are more intensely mixed combat arenas with dynamic stage hazards, but that's surprisingly rare. Still, even without a real synthesis of the combat and the platforming, each feels good in isolation. While the Metroidvania platforming kit is pretty much an off-the-rack affair, with a double jump, air dash, wall jumps, grappling anchors, wall crawling, the aforementioned slow glide, the ground pound, etc., combat warrants further discussion as it seems like it's received more developer and audience attention than any other aspect of the game aside from Ben Piquet's incomparable art direction, which, to be honest, is really the star of the show. Unlike in classic Shinobi games, which give the player a combat toolkit and opponents that can easily match it, allowing Joe to either overpower his enemies or get bodied, depending on player skill, in Art of Vengeance, Joe is just ridiculously overpowered and the enemies undertuned. It's not surprising that popcorn enemies can be quickly dispatched. The role of an enemy like that is to complicate other encounters, not go toe-to-toe. Nor is it a problem that all of the hardier enemies telegraph their moves so clearly. But it is a problem that reacting to those telegraphs and punishing them is so easy. In the recent Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, for example, the player's attack opportunities are often short, and the vectors by which they can approach are constrained, so in Ragebound there is a tension and thrill to making the most of these moments. In Art of Vengeance, by contrast, the player can just jump or double jump to avoid damage, then mash the heavy attack button to dive kick and follow up with an additional combo. This is generally enough to kill or at least stagger and juggle all but the most durable enemy. There are shielded enemies, sure, but that just requires double jumping over them or walking through them before the dive kick. And there are rare enemies with anti-air options, yes, but those just require air dashing through their anti-airs before dive kicking from behind. Nor are the wide openings the only problem. Joe's Wind Slash Ninpo can clear out whole screens of enemies cheaply when paired with the easily obtained Wind Sculptor accessory, for example. And even if the player decides to largely duke it out on the ground, enemy telegraphs are so slow, the game constantly gives the player moments to reassess due to excessive hit stop, and Joe's movements are so fast and easily transitioned into a dodge that at times it feels like the game has to get Joe's permission to do damage to him. At no point is the game unpleasant to play, but there are so many wasted opportunities. A player with average skill with Metroidvanias or other action platformers will probably manage to kill at least half of the bosses on their first attempt, which is disappointing. But it is worth saying that it feels great to dive kick bosses and slash them to ribbons, even if those are the empty calories of action game design. And this is all fair as far as it goes. Lizard Cube likely was aiming to prioritize power fantasy above any other considerations when designing the combat system. But it doesn't explain why there isn't any kind of hard mode. It's bad enough that no hard mode is available at the outset. That's bad practice regardless of game. But doubly so when the game is a sequel in a series famous for being challenging. Legacy Shinobi fans are going to come to this game with their legacy skill, and they are going to roll through the enemies as easily as Joe Musashi himself. Sincerely, that's cute, unbalancing the game to support the cliche, how is he doing this, he's just one man scenario. But at minimum, there should have been a hard mode unlock, something at the end of the rainbow. What does unlock after the end is one super boss, a boss rush mode, and the option to replay the stages in arcade mode for rank. The super boss is a much appreciated bit of Shinobi 3 fan service, but the difficulty is honestly not high enough for the effort the player has to go through to unlock it. The boss rush mode, honestly, is the most faithful Shinobi experience in the entire game. No cul-de-sacs to explore, no checkpoints to restore health, no infinite retries for each morsel of challenge. The player has to make hard decisions about where they want to save or spend their ninpo or kunai, or when it's safe to go for another hit before dodging, given that they have to do the entire boss rush on one life bar. For one shining combat challenge, the dynamics of classic arcade-influenced design escape the all-encompassing creeping shadow of Metroidvanias and modern best practices. Finally, arcade mode is basically just a full replay of the stages as they were, seemingly not remixed or adjusted except that the optional Anku Rift challenges are removed, and all collectibles are replaced with crests that contribute to rank. Rank is affected by various factors like speed, number of kills, execution chain, number of crests picked up, and especially by whether the player avoids damage. The problem with this mode is that it really highlights that the stages were designed around exploration more than proper flow. It's okay in the first couple of stages, but even by the mountain, the cracks show. Stages are overly long and oscillate between boring corridors that the player spams the dodge roll in to dash through on one hand, and combat arenas or platforming gauntlets on the other. It feels strangely like a farming route to grind materials in an action RPG, rather than a coherent level with a carefully designed flow. Go through the empty bit, into a spot of real gameplay, then go through another empty bit. Is it worth it? Yes. It's a compromised product that the player will likely outgrow soon after rolling credits, and there are some deep problems with the combat and level design, but Art of Vengeance feels great in the hand, and the moment-to-moment play variety plus the frankly world-class visuals are enough to succeed on Spectacle. It could have been better. Shinobi 3 deserved to be treated as more than an aesthetic theme, and it's not nearly as well considered a successor as Streets of Rage 4 was. But the game is still solidly recommended for anyone who likes the idea of a Metroidvania with an overpowered ninja protagonist. Nintendojo awards Shinobi Art of Vengeance a grade of B+. If you enjoyed this review, please support us with a like and a follow. You can find more of Nintendojo on our website and on social media, and we'll see you next time.